I love my school because my teachers and my friends are always ready to help me. And my school teaches me great values which will make me a good person when I grow up.
I love my school's focus on social justice and the opportunities that my school gives me to give back to the wider community.
At St. Joe's, I really like the teachers. They muck around with me, they help me with my work, and they just include me in like everything.
I love my school because I like seeing it get built each year.
I love my school because of all the extracurricular activities they have to offer, like the school musical production, netball and touch footy.
I love my school because the sand pit and because it's fun to play in.
I like my school because the buddy program is good and I get to spend some time with other people in the classes.
I love my school because all of my friends and teachers are caring.
I love my school because the teachers and students share such an important connection and the teachers make sure that every need is met.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, welcome to the launch of Towards 2027, Expanding Horizons and Deepening Practices Strategy for Catholic Education, South Australia. My name is Jess Adamson and I'm delighted to be your host tonight as we discuss and debate some critical issues around education in the lead up to the March 19 election. Now, I don't profess to be an expert on all of these issues, but I did attend a Catholic boarding school myself, and my three children have all attended St Thomas Primary School at Goodwood, the wonderful St Thomas School, so I am privileged to play a very small part in this event tonight. Tonight we bring together a statewide community of those who participate in the life and mission of the Church and its ongoing renewal through their contribution to Catholic education and parish leadership. Welcome to each and every one of you joining us, many of you from schools and from homes across the state. We do, of course, wish that we could have seen you in person, and we look forward to the times when we can do that very soon. To our very special guest tonight, Archbishop Patrick O'Regan, Archbishop of Adelaide, Father Dean Marin, Vicar General, Archdiocese of Adelaide, Professor Dennis Ralph, Chair, South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, the Honourable Stephen Marshall MP, Premier of South Australia, the Honourable John Gardner MP, Minister for Education, Mr Peter Malinauskas MP, Leader of the Opposition, Mr Blair Boyer MP, Shadow Minister for Education, Dr Neil McGoran, Director of Catholic Education South Australia, Mrs Nikki Martin, Director of Catholic Education in the Diocese of Port Pirie. With a 178-year history, Catholic Education South Australia is an educational sector committed to raising the hearts and minds of every child whose learning and education is entrusted to their care. Their approach is to provide excellence in education, working in partnership with families and communities to create opportunities for students to encounter life to the full in all its personal, intellectual, religious, social and cultural richness, helping them to be thriving, capable learners as well as extraordinary human beings. The strength of South Australian Catholic schools lies in the teachers. They don't just know students by name, they know them by heart. They bring a range of skills, life experiences and values to their classrooms and their students. They are leaders of young people. Learning experiences are grounded in Catholic values and beliefs. They want every student to experience success according to their unique characteristics and talent. That's why Catholic Education South Australia is committed to professional learning, leadership development and ensuring they are always at the cutting edge of education. So today marks the launch of a bold strategy that will ensure the Catholic education in South Australia continues to excel in every way into the future. The strategy will guide the important work of the Commission, Catholic schools, centres and offices so that more than ever before, Catholic education can continue to provide opportunities for young people to grow and to be thriving people, capable learners and leaders for the world God desires. It is inspired by the life and mission of Jesus and with the learning, formation and achievement of children and young people at its heart. I now invite Nikki Martin to deliver an acknowledgement of country, followed by Archbishop Patrick O'Regan, who will lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Jess. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across our diocese and acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging. In doing so, we acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a deep cultural, spiritual and historical connection to country. We acknowledge and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people gathered with us across this great state this evening.
Good evening, dear sisters and brothers in Christ. We begin our prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus was standing one day by the lake of Gennesaret, with the crowd pressing round him, listening to the word of God, when he caught sight of 2 boats close to the bank. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, it was Simon's, and asked him to pull out a little from the shore. He sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and pay out your nets for a catch." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all night long and caught nothing. But if you say so, I'll pay out the nets." And when they had done this, they netted such a huge number of fish that the nets began to tear. So they signalled to their companions in the other boat to come and help them. When these came, they filled the 2 boats to sinking point. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at the knees of Jesus, saying, "Leave me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were completely overcome by the catch that they had made. So also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were Simon's partners. But Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, it's people you will catch." Then, bringing their boats back to the land, they left everything and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord. Dear sisters and brothers, Jesus tells us to not be afraid. And as we launch the SAC strategy for the next 5 years, let us too do so, confident of God's abiding love and care.
For all leaders in the Catholic Church, and in particular those involved in Catholic education, that they will be inspired by the Gospel and will work with courage and in partnership to serve the young people and families in Catholic schools. Lord, hear us.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the success of the SAC strategy over the coming years, that by putting out into the deep, more people will come to know the love of God and find a place of belonging and acceptance within our school communities. Lord, hear us.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all Catholic school communities, as they begin this new school year, that they are places of trust and hope where people receive the invitation to discipleship, to become thriving people, capable learners and leaders for the world God desires. Lord, hear us.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all who are currently unwell with COVID or are experiencing disconnection or anxiety because of it, that they find renewed trust and hope in the words of Jesus and will not be afraid. Lord, hear us.
Lord, hear our prayer. Loving God, aware that you are always with us and accept us, whatever our situation, we bring you these prayers through Christ our Lord. Amen.
My school is special because we focus not only on the academic success of students, but also the mental and physical well-being.
What makes my school special is the nice teachers. My school is special because my friends are from different cultures and backgrounds, and it's really fun and interesting learning about their cultures.
My school is special because of all the open spaces like the oval and the classrooms.
Because it takes me on excursions, and
My college is very special to me because I'm able to be a mentor and teacher to some of the year 7s and 8s that I usually wouldn't be able to interact with and make friends with.
my school is special because my teachers help me. And teachers love and care me, and
My school is special because they help me when I'm struggling with assignments.
and it's fun.
My school is special because we have mentor groups and each morning we get to meet up with them and they have all different ages, so you get to bond with different people.
And I enjoy going to school.
That's the main thing, isn't it? Enjoying going to school. Some great messages from our kids there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one of the main reasons that we are here tonight is to, of course, launch a major strategy for Catholic education in South Australia. To tell us what it's all about, we welcome to the lectern the Chair of the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, Professor Dennis Ralph.
Thank you, Jess. And thank you, Archbishop, for leading us in prayer and for your leadership, your spiritual guidance and support. Thank you, Nikki, for the acknowledgement of country, for leading us in prayer and for your leadership of education in the Port Pirie Diocese. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, I extend a warm welcome to everyone participating in this evening's significant event, when we launch the Catholic Education Strategic Directions document towards 2027, expanding horizons and deepening practices. I extend a special welcome to the Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Stephen Marshall MP, to the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Peter Malinauskas MP, to the Minister for Education, the Honourable John Gardner MP, and Mr Blair Boyer MP, Shadow Minister for Education. And I thank them for setting aside time in their busy schedules to be with us for this important Catholic education event. This evening, we look forward to hearing from each of our special guests. We cast our minds back from early beginnings in 1844 in a small chapel on Pirie Street. Catholic education in South Australia was born. It quickly grew to over 20 schools by 1866, with a new Jesuit school at Seven Hill and schools at Penola, including one now known as the Mary MacKillop Memorial School, which is one of the oldest continuing Catholic schools in Australia. Since that time, we have seen the establishment of Catholic schools in all parts of Adelaide our regional cities and country areas, stretching all the way to Roxby Downs in the far north. We owe deep gratitude to St. Mary of the Cross MacKillop for her pioneering work in establishing Catholic schools across this state and beyond. In 1950, Catholic education in South Australia expanded to tertiary education with the establishment of Aquinas College at North Adelaide, a premier university college for students from all parts of this state and beyond, including my hometown, Broken Hill, the Silver City. Aquinas College has been delivering quality education for university students for 71 years. Today, Catholic schools, colleges and centres are spread across the length and breadth of South Australia, with over 48,000 students in 103 schools and colleges and 118 campuses with nearly 9,000 staff. We have also established over 30 different service centres for children in the birth to 5 years age range. Back in 2015, as we looked forward, the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools launched the strategy for leading Catholic education to new levels of excellence. Since this time, the strategy has guided the work of the Commission, Catholic schools and colleges, centres and offices. These have included the pursuit of excellence for children and young people, the implementation of coordinated and systemic approaches to staff formation and professional development, and the achievement of significant milestones, such as the transition of Year 7s into secondary settings by the commencement of 2019, and the development of new schools and campus structures across this state. The strategy sought to strengthen, transform and promote Catholic education and put forward actions to implement initiatives in the period 2016 to 2021. In response to that strategy, there have been a wide range of new developments and outcomes. We have created new schools like Macaulay Community School at Hove, a Catholic school in the Mercy tradition, which I visited early this week, in which to meet the 82 reception students. To Xavier College, Two Wells, to the formation of the first time a secondary Catholic college in the Riverland with St. Francis of Assisi College in Renmark opening this week, and the Compass Catholic Community in Davern Park, a school for the 17 to 24-year age group. Again, Catholic education breaking new ground and serving the community of South Australia. We developed a new campus of Nazareth College, the St. Gabriel Centre at Underdale. There have been a number of college amalgamations. Marymount College amalgamated with Sacred Heart College, Galilee School merged with Cardine College, and Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish School merged with Mount Carmel College. Over $400 million has been approved by the Commission and spent on school and college buildings and facilities in this last 4 years, with the state government providing just over $34 $4 million to Catholic education from 2018 to 2021. This is the first time in 2018 that a state government had provided capital funding to Catholic schools. And I want to say here tonight, this has been very much appreciated. It's formed the basis for our schools to go ahead and seek other funds from their communities and to borrow money to undertake major projects. The federal government has provided us with $28 million. They seem to like that number because it hasn't increased over the last 10 years. So we are hoping in the near future the federal government will make an announcement that they have decided to increase that significantly. But you've probably done the sums already. The remaining amount of the $400 million approved by the Commission came from $338 million funded by parents through savings, donations, fees and loans. I want to put on record that we much prefer state and federal government grants rather than more loans. It's a subtle difference. One has to repay the loans. We have had improved access in rural and regional localities, and that's been made possible through the state government providing $1 million. We thank Minister Gardner and the government for that decision of committing $4 million over the 4-year period. It has enabled us to address a number of issues relating to access. It's enabled us to buy some buses and to support parents with some travel subsidies. Whilst this grant has been much appreciated, there is a need for additional funds. Realising all the demands on government, we would be pleased to see an increase to at least $1.5 million, but I can assure you if it's $2 million, it will not be returned. We created a system of 200 scholarships funded by Catholic education to enable 200 children in care to access a Catholic education without fees. This was a new step for Catholic education. We have forged a new and exciting partnership with the state government in the establishment of the Western Technical College at Rosewater. This college is aligned with Mount Carmel College and serves the training needs not only of Catholic schools and colleges, but also of government high schools and independent schools across the western suburbs. We have also forged new and exciting partnerships with industry. And particularly, I want to comment on our excellent partnership with the Hickenbotham Group in the establishment of Xavier College at Two Wells, and convey our appreciation to Mr. Michael Hickenbotham, their Managing Director, and the people of that company for their wonderful cooperative efforts in the establishment of that terrific new school. Across that period, there has been a reduction of fees, with fees remission as needed and affordability improved across the board. In country areas, we have sought to improve pathways for students in secondary education with expansion of secondary education opportunities in areas such as Wallaroo, Murray Bridge, Clare and Peterborough. Catholic education has demonstrated impressive agility, care, compassion and support for students, families and our staff during the COVID pandemic in 2020 and 21. Our Commission extends its deep admiration and appreciation to the staff of our schools for the depth of their care for the students and for the way they have managed the complex responses required during the COVID pandemic. In this period, there's also been a significant overall enrolment increase due to positive community recognition of the outstanding work of our Catholic schools because of our improved affordability, because we reintroduced reception intakes in July of each year. In the first year, we had 474 in 2016 July, and that grew to 1,292 in July 2021, and I'm hoping that it'll be well over 1,500 in July 2022. We've also had an increase in our enrolment due to our action for the early transition of Year 7s into secondary settings from 2019. Notwithstanding these exciting developments, new priorities are emerging through significant movements in the Catholic Church, such as the Plenary Council in Australia, and the call for greater emphasis nationally by the National Catholic Education Commission and all states and territories on faith formation, the accessibility of Catholic schools, and academic excellence. We have so much to celebrate in Catholic education. But in celebrating that, we must not be enticed into complacency. We must focus on the future and the development of challenging proposals to meet the needs and demands of a changing world. Pope Francis reminded us that we should appear as joyful messengers of challenging proposals, whilst being guardians of the goodness and beauty which shines forth in a life of fidelity to the gospel. And I have no doubt that we will need to remember the words of Pope Francis as we confront a raft of challenging proposals and other challenges as we come to grips with the known and unknown dimensions of the expanding horizons that lie ahead. In recognition of the wide range of current and emerging implications ahead and changing expectations, our Commission undertook an extensive consultation with the governors and trustees of our schools, with the school principals and their staff, with the priests and deacons across the state, with the chairs of school boards and the members of school boards, with staff and students and with families. And we gathered many insights and we formulated a way forward that will ensure that Catholic education in South Australia not only continues to excel in every way into the future, but to go beyond the excellence as we introduce towards 2027 expanding horizons and deepening practices, our strategy for Catholic education South Australia. This new strategy seeks to help shape thriving people, capable learners and leaders for the world God desires. In our Catholic schools, centres and offices, whose vision, cultures, rituals, policies, practices and experiences are inspired by the person and message of Jesus. Within a state and national system of Catholic schools, centres and others, committed to educational excellence, faith formation, accessibility and growth, and for the purposes of contributing to a more just, equitable and hope-filled future within communities and society. It is truly a bold strategy, inspired by the life and mission of Jesus, and with the learning, formation and achievement of children and young people at its heart. To bring the strategy to life and inspired by the vision, missions and values of Catholic education, our Commission has endorsed 7 commitments and 21 outcomes to shape and drive its decision-making and the work of Catholic schools, centres and offices during the period 2022 to 2026. While the extensive consultation and engagement process elicited many insights and a way forward for Catholic education, our Commission is aware that we need to be alert to new horizons, new developments, changes in policies, people's experiences and the myriad of possibilities that regularly present in education. To facilitate this process and bring it to life, towards 2027 expanding horizons and deepening practices, the Commission has approved its corporate plan for 2022 to 2026, which captures specific outcomes and strategies for each commitment over the 5-year period. The Commission has endorsed the 2022 annual plan, which maps out in appropriate detail the specific work and actions of the Commission, schools, colleges, centres and offices in 2022. We are committed to the ongoing processes of the strategic planning cycle. The Commission will receive quarterly updates on progress and achievements relative to the annual plan. There will also be a regular review of the corporate plan. The corporate plan and each annual plan will be made available to Catholic schools, colleges, centres and offices to enable coordination and alignment across all facets of Catholic education in South Australia. In reflecting upon our expanding horizons, I pictured the landscape of Catholic education in South Australia by the end of 2026. In doing so, I identified a wide range of evidence of our joint efforts over the previous 5 years, including the following. The enrolment in Catholic schools and colleges and centres had increased from 48,000 students to 54,000 students at the commencement of 2027. I also could see that there were several new schools and campuses at locations such as Xavier College, Two Wells, expanding from primary into R to 12, with an enrolment of more than 1,000 and possibly more than 1,200. And also a new Catholic school developed in the northern metropolitan area and another R to 12 school in the southern area. The High Performance Centre at Mercedes College will be completed and applauded for its design, quality and functionality. A new senior campus of Nazareth College with 800 students will be operating on Findon Road at Kidman Park. There'll also be a major expansion of Cardine College. That'll be completed on new land that we purchased for a senior campus and an impressive sports facility. There'll be another expansion of Cardine College at their Galilee campus at Aldinga, with extensions catering for both middle and senior schooling. There'll be a new Catholic special school facility. It will be of world-class standard as part of the implementation of the findings from our Students with Disability Review. We will have 2 additional early years centres and places for 400 additional children. Our preschool provision will have grown from 420 places to more than 1,000 places across the additional 20 preschools and where possible in low socio-economic areas. And during the period of this towards 2027 strategy, we will have appointed 30 new principals. At the end of 2026, the following will be obvious to all in South Australia. Our Catholic identity will be strong and visible. Our learning and teaching will be excellent. Our academic standards will be outstanding. And while it's important and exciting to address an impressive range of expanding horizons, of no less significance, however, is our commitment to deepening our practices and to doing so at all levels, in the classroom, in each school and centre, and across our region, across the entire system of Catholic schools and colleges. The extensive consultation feedback in developing our strategy for the period ahead reinforce the value and benefits that will be gained from continuing to improve and deepen those practices that are at the heart of a purposeful Catholic education. Therefore, our strategy acknowledges the importance of excellent teaching. We are committed to strengthening our understanding of and approaches to learning and assessment design, to be even more active in co-constructing these with children and young people, and to prioritising students' reflections on their capabilities. We will actively pursue improved student outcomes across a range of measures, including SACE completion and NAPLAN. In part of our response to the recently completed Students with Disability Review, we are committed to deepening our practices in relation to equity and inclusion in all our schools and centres. The Towards 2027 strategy also recognises that as an employer of nearly 9,000 people, we have the precious opportunity and responsibility to enhance a culture of belonging and professional growth among a very large group across a broad spectrum of roles. We are committed to supporting our staff and to ensuring a shared sense of purpose and commitment that will inspire and nurture them in their professional lives. And as an employer of choice, we are committed to deepening practices that attract, sustain, and value people and their leadership. And finally, all of us, with an interest in and commitment to Catholic education, have the opportunity through this important strategy towards 2027, expanding horizons and deepening practices, to ensure that our practices, our actions, our relationships and our decisions are centred in the person and message of Jesus Christ and help to bring to life his mission in our system of Catholic schools, centres and offices. In closing, it gives me great pleasure, on behalf of the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, to launch our strategic planning document towards 2027, expanding horizons and deepening practices.
As we head towards 2027, Catholic Education South Australia has a renewed strategy aimed at expanding our horizons and deepening practices. Our strategy is grounded in our mission, vision, values, and purpose. This strategy will help us to continue to shape thriving people, capable learners, and leaders for the world God desires, and contribute to a more socially just, equitable, and hope-filled future. We will help children and young people develop the key capabilities they need to succeed in a rapidly changing world. Our Living, Learning, Leading framework underpins all that we do. It sits at the heart of our strategy and actions. The strategy is strengthened and positioned for success by focusing on 7 commitments. These commitments are: Catholic identity and mission, ensuring that the identity and mission of Catholic education is centred in the person and message of Jesus. Experience within a culture of dialogue and includes quality religious education and meaningful and authentic prayer, liturgy and formative experiences. Students. Fulfilling our promise that children and young people will be nurtured as thriving people, capable learners and leaders for the world God desires. Diversity, equity and inclusion. Increasing the accessibility of and experiences of diversity, equity and inclusion in our schools and centres, inspired by Catholic teaching and tradition. Learning and teaching. Pursuing excellence in learning, teaching and student outcomes across all Catholic schools and centres in South Australia. People, leadership and culture. Enhancing a culture of professional growth in Catholic schools, centres and offices, that attracts, sustains and values people, their leadership and workforce excellence. Financial stewardship and improvement. Investing effectively in infrastructure, resourcing and capital development, and facilitating a system-wide plan aimed at improving student outcomes and system growth. Participation in mission and purpose. Ensuring that Catholic schools, centres and offices in South Australia are committed to educational excellence, enlivened faith formation, accessibility and growth. And these are our commitments to you. At every Catholic school around our state. Inspired by the life and mission of Jesus, you'll find our staff with the learning, formation and achievement of children and young people in our hearts. Helping to develop thriving young people who are comfortable and confident in who they are and ready to make a difference in our world. For more information, pick up a copy of our strategy at your school or visit our website.
It is now my great pleasure to welcome the Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Stephen Marshall MP, to address us this evening. Welcome, Premier.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry we can't be together in person this evening, but I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to engage with you all on such an important occasion for Catholic education in South Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, Kaurna land, where I am, and all the traditional owners of the lands where your Catholic school communities are based right across our state. It has been my privilege to lead our state over the last 4 years. Since being elected, my government has faced unprecedented challenges, droughts, fires, floods, and of course COVID, and yet our economy has never been stronger. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, our state has more people working and lower unemployment than at any other time since records began. South Australia now has the strongest economic growth in the entire nation. This means the children that you teach have more opportunities for fulfilling careers here in South Australia rather than moving interstate or overseas. Since being elected, education has enjoyed unprecedented government spending. Only our health portfolio has seen a greater level of investment. Our ambition is for world-class schools and early childhood services across our state, giving all of our children the opportunity to be their best and to thrive, wherever they live, whatever school that they go to. We see Catholic education not as a competitor to the public sector, but rather as a partner to government in serving the children of South Australia. This has been a distinct change in approach, and I want to thank everyone who works in Catholic education for embracing that partnership and working so closely with my team to manage some of the challenges and key opportunities that we have seen over the past 4 years. Some of those opportunities have required funding commitments by the state government, and I am very proud of my government's record here. In 2018, we were the first state to sign up to the National School Funding Reform Agreement, which guaranteed fair funding based on need. It unlocked an increase in funding by the state government and guaranteed significant new federal funding. We were criticised by our political opponents for doing so and by the unions. Critics said that the National School Funding Reform Agreement was too generous to the non-government schools. But we know that families from all backgrounds attend Catholic schools and that disadvantage does not limit itself to one schooling sector. At the last election, my government committed to funding non-government schools to 22% of the schooling resource standard, and we have delivered this. I can confirm that we will continue to do this in the years to come. Before the last election, Catholic education led the way in South Australia, moving Year 7 to high school, and I would like to commend you for doing so. As you know, our public schools have now made the move too, and now Year 7s across the state are receiving the same advantages as those in Catholic schools. With the move of Year 7 to high school across South Australia, the Year 7 students in all settings now receive a higher level of state government funding per capita. I was pleased to hear there has been a strong resurgence of interest from parents in sending their children to Catholic schools. Congratulations to everyone for this wonderful achievement. Two issues not taken into account by the Schooling Resource Standard are infrastructure and transport. Ahead of the last election, I committed that if we were elected, we would deliver infrastructure grants worth $5.5 million per year for Catholic schools. Not only have we delivered on our commitment, but in each of the last 2 years, we've doubled it. Alongside the partnership between my government and the Catholic Education for the Western Technical College, we have invested more than $35 million in Catholic schools since becoming elected. This is well in excess of what we promised. It is also the first time that any South Australian government has had an infrastructure grants program for Catholic schools. We will continue this grants program, and I look forward to making further announcements about these important projects soon. Ahead of the last election, I committed to undertaking a review of school bus services in country South Australia. As a result of that review, we introduced a new grants program for non-government schools in the country. I'm told that the new grants program has worked very well, enabling the purchase of some new buses and providing sensible local solutions. However, more can be done, and I am very pleased tonight to announce that not only will this program continue in the years ahead, a returned Marshall Liberal government will increase it by 50% to $1.5 million per year. Our Catholic schools do a wonderful job in providing a strong start for nearly 50,000 of our children and young people. And I want to thank you all for the wonderful role that you have played. Tonight, you're launching a set of strategic commitments for the next 5 years that will expand horizons and deepen practices for Catholic schools. As you undertake that important work, the Marshall Liberal government looks forward to further building on the outstanding partnership we have built over the last 4 years. Congratulations to all, and please enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Premier. Well, of course, we did hear some snippets of good news there, ladies and gentlemen, which we will unpack shortly. But first, we're going to hear firsthand from the Minister for Education, John Gardner, who has joined us here tonight. Minister, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're here tonight, those of us at the Catholic Education Head Office on the lands of the Kaurna people and throughout South Australia, wherever we are meeting. I know that everybody in attendance and participating in tonight's very important meeting acknowledges the tremendous importance of the relationship with the Aboriginal people on those lands to those lands, and that I acknowledge emerging, past and present elders. I'd like to also acknowledge some of the people who are here with us in the Catholic Education offices, to the Archbishop Patrick O'Regan, to Father Dean, to my parliamentary colleagues, Peter Malinauskas and Blair Boyer from the opposition. Indeed, also to distinguished guests, to colleagues around South Australia, to friends, I trust, around South Australia who are participating this evening. I'd like to congratulate in particular Professor Dennis Ralph and Dr. Neil McGorran on the work that has gone in not only to the development of the strategic plan that we'll talk a little bit more about shortly, but indeed to this evening's presentation. A presentation that enables us to have the opportunity, both the government and the opposition, through the prism of talking about the Catholic Education Strategic Plan, to talk a bit about some of the things that underpin the principles driving us and the government that we seek, that we are, in our case, leading, and those that the opposition seeks to. It gives us the opposition to talk a little bit about the relationship built, the opportunity to talk about the principles that drive not just a transactional alliance of understanding where the finances go here and what arrangements for what programs would go there, but the principles underpinning. And as the Premier said in his remarks, it's a principle based on we see it as a partnership between government and Catholic education in service of South Australia's children and young people. Of course, their needs underpin everything that we seek to do in education. So, colleagues and friends, we all know the critical importance of education in our children's life. A strong education can make all the difference in the world to a child's future. and it can help them find the pathway to enable them to discover and realise their potential based on their God-given talents to lead a happy and successful life. I often talk with our students and our young people about what success means. It means different things to different people. Our talents are different, and the things that we are passionate about are different. Sometimes success for an individual can be defined by the job we have, the career that we have. Potentially it's about relationships. Potentially it is about our service to God. Success is going to mean different things for individuals, but in our school's quest and our education system's quest to help our students to lead successful lives, to find pathways to successful lives, I tend to think about success pretty simply, first principles. I reckon a successful life is one where you wake up in the morning and you're looking forward to the day ahead. Or it could be one where you go to sleep at night, feeling like you've contributed that day, feeling like you've done something worthwhile. I tell you what, if you get both of those things, you've really hit the jackpot. And as we seek to ensure that our students and young people, our children and young people around South Australia are equipped with the tools that will ally with their God-given talents to get them onto that pathway to a successful life, that principle underlines what we do. Our government's ambition has been and continues to be for every child in every classroom in every town, suburb in South Australia, every kindy, every school, to be supported, to realise their potential, to help them find that pathway to success. And it's really important for us that when we talk about every school supporting every child to find that pathway to success, we're not just talking about one sector. The challenges confronting our children do not confine themselves to just one brand of schooling or one sector of schooling. And we see Catholic education and indeed, of course, our independent schools as well as partners of government in delivering for our children and young people and delivering on that shared ambition that all of our schools in South Australia will be world class, that every child in South Australia and their unique dignity and needs and opportunities and skills and strengths will be valued and supported in that way. As partners in that ambition, I think Dennis set out what Catholic education brings to the table exceptionally well in his presentation before, and I want to commend him for that. Taking us through 178 years of history from those early days on Perry Street, from the extraordinary efforts of St Mary of the Cross. I sat in that classroom in Penola when I was there with Nick McBride not so long ago and thought about the different ways and the experiences confronting children in that 19th century environment and the extraordinary different experiences of those passionate educators in that environment. And we are, of course, impacted by the environment of the world, and the last 2 years has reminded us of that very strongly. But I think if we come back to first principles and remember what we're here to do, then we can't go too far astray. And Catholic education has always had a strong sense of mission and values, and that's accentuated by the strategic plan that we're here to talk about tonight. I think in our endeavours to realise that ambition, Dennis also set out some of the very strong things that we've done to demonstrate the way of how far we have come over the last 4 years. You'll note the Premier in his comments talked about how we see Catholic education as a collaboration, an opportunity to cooperate for our children and young people, not as a competition for the public schooling sector alone. We no longer, for example, advertise in cinemas and on TV screens to encourage people to send their children to one sector rather than Catholic education. That's something that I don't think is going to happen again in the future, and that's good. What we do spend our money on instead is our children's well-being and the opportunities. The Premier identified we were the first state to sign up to that set of national school funding reforms in late 2018. That required a commitment of significant increased funding, not just to non-government schools, but we had to commit $700 million extra out of the state budget to support our public schools as well. And that was a tremendously important move, and we've done that. And it's really important that as I talk about the opportunities for Catholic education tonight, I thought it would be useful to outline that I want all of our schools in South Australia, that includes our public schools, of course, to be truly world class. But what we see is an opportunity for parents to have the opportunity to choose a school that reflects what their child needs. And that might be about a choice reflecting their values, their faith, particular things in a culture of a school that family values. And the government of South Australia, a martial Liberal government, really honours and values that choice and the sacrifices that families often make to pay those fees and make that possible. But a fair funding system, and I think that the Gonski arrangements that have been set in place are as good a funding system as has ever been described. And it has reduced a lot of the fake fights between Canberra and South Australia and other states and between sectors significantly by setting that schooling resource standard. It sets in place the principles of what a school needs to support its children, understanding that distance from a CBD area, that the SES status of a school, that the language background of a school, the numbers of Aboriginal children, children with guardianship, children with extra needs, are to be reflected in government funding for that school. So in signing that National School Funding Reform Agreement, we absolutely ensured that a needs-based funding arrangement would support our non-government schools and our government schools as well. And we've committed not just to the 19.7% of SRS in that National School Agreement, but we kept to our election commitment, which we restate tonight, of 22% for our non-government schools. What that's meant in practice, I'll just go through the figures very quickly. In 2017, state government support to Catholic education, and this isn't those capital grants that Dennis spoke about, this is the recurrent funding, was $95 million. In 2018, $108 million. In 2019, $114 million. In 2020, $123 million. And in 2021, that had grown to $143 million as we significantly increased from 95 to $143 million over the last 5 years, the support from state government for Catholic schools. That is a clear statement of the value that is put on the partnership and the significant support that is put there for all of the children in our Catholic schools in South Australia. We also, for the first time, introduced infrastructure grants, grants that have supported schools across South Australia, from Hove to Tea Tree Gully to Evanston to West Hindmarsh, from Greenacres and Glenelg, from Renmark to Brooklyn Park. Right across South Australia, dozens of Catholic schools over the last 4 years have benefited from those agreements. And we promised 5.5. The last 2 years we've delivered 11. The program will continue. Infrastructure grants in the Western Technical Colleges and, of course, the increased support that the Premier announced earlier for school buses, recognising the particular challenges that so many Catholic families have in getting their children to those schools in regional areas. That need for partnership and collaboration has been demonstrated more than ever before by the challenges of the last 2 years. I reckon that Neil McGorran and I probably spoke every day for a period of weeks at the end of Term 1 and the beginning of Term 2 in 2020 as the stunning impacts of the coronavirus pandemic hit us very hard. But by working together with the independent sector and Catholic sector and indeed our public sector having the same rules throughout the pandemic, that has helped us as we've stuck to the health advice to put our children and our young people in the best stead, I think, of any jurisdiction in Australia, probably any jurisdiction in the world. South Australia was the only state in Australia that not only had kids coming back from the beginning of Term 2 in 2020, but in every sector with the same rules. And that partnership reduced confusion for families. It ensured that our kids had access to schooling as strongly as they could. And this year, Omicron has presented a range of new challenges that were not anticipated even as recently as October last year, when you'll recall Omicron was not even on the radar of the World Health Organization, had not been discovered in South Africa even. But Omicron has presented new challenges, and we've continued those partnerships. Throughout December and January, we continued those conversations, and Catholic schools and public schools have returned, in this staggered start as it is, returned strongly. And I think the education of our children in South Australia is going very well. I want to celebrate the new Catholic Education Strategic Plan, expanding horizons and deepening practices. I was struck in going through it how many of the principles in the plan would be appropriate for a public education system, for any education system, and indeed would be celebrated as such. Forgive me if I summarise them incorrectly, but in the mission a mission to see schools as communities creating opportunities for encountering life to the full, a vision for educational environments where students and families find every classroom or learning space culturally and spiritually connected to them, values that are familiar to Catholic education with a commitment to processes of learning that are formative, challenging, engaging, lifelong and life-wide, inclusive of those at the edges, filled with sensitivity, justice and compassion, and critically purpose to help shape thriving people, capable learners, leaders for the world God desires. All of these are deeply rooted, underpinned and animated, of course, by a commitment to our faith in God, His purpose for us, His love for us revealed in Jesus Christ and presented in the Scriptures. The mission, vision, values and purposes have culminated in 7 commitments and 21 action points. You have my commitment that the Marshall Liberal Government will continue to be partners with Catholic education in seeking to deliver on those. When there have been opportunities, Dennis mentioned some of them before, new land required to fulfil some of those visions. State government has worked hand in glove where we can on a very, very good faith basis with Catholic education to help realise those opportunities. The funding for infrastructure has not just supported dozens of existing schools, but has also gone towards supporting some of those new schools as well. I'm sure there'll be further opportunities to collaborate in the years ahead. But buildings are great. Good buildings help teachers and students to do the teaching and learning in a really strong way, in the way that the curriculum was designed to be taught. But there's very few things more important in our schools than the people who work in them. And can I say, I think Jess said it very well in her introductory comments tonight. The strength of Catholic schools are its teachers. And she said they don't just know students by names, but by their hearts. And I know that tonight we have many teachers, we have many school leaders from around South Australia, hundreds if not thousands, part of tonight's event. And so I'd like to complete my remarks by saying something to you. I apologise if it's something you've heard before, maybe it's something new, but I think that it's never been said better than by Cardinal Williams, the New Zealand Cardinal in 2000, when he said, and this is a message particularly for the teachers, if ever you become discouraged and doubt that you are positively influencing others, then know that part of you will be flying with every pilot, building with every architect, diagnosing with every doctor, creating with every artist, fashioning with every craftsman and teaching with every teacher. And more than that, part of you will be woven into the fabric of every sound marriage and every good home. You are making your way into the hearts and minds of the children and the young people that you lead and that you teach, and you are leaving a very valuable legacy for future generations. I only hope that all of the rest of us who also work in education, supporting the work that you do in that classroom, can hope to have any part of what Cardinal Williams said of the teachers ascribed to us as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your words tonight and for your support of the bold strategy that has been launched tonight. Now, we have some questions for Minister Gardner. Of course, we would be normally asking them face-to-face, but they have been sent in by people from all over the state. Before we start, though, I wanted to acknowledge that it is actually your birthday today. We wish you a happy birthday, and we sincerely thank you for joining us and for being away from your family on this night.
Well, we've actually moved my birthday to tomorrow.
Okay, that's a great plan.
My children are very, very excited. They know it's Daddy's birthday this week, but they're 3 in 1. So not super confident with the dates.
Okay.
So we've managed to shift that to tomorrow so I could be with you tonight.
Fantastic. Well, just because it's your birthday, it doesn't mean the questions get any easier. And so the first question we have, Minister, is from Damien Judd, Principal, Samaritan College at Whyalla. And you touched on and capital funding. This is about proportional capital funding for non-government students. We know, of course, that 1 in 5 students attends a Catholic school in SA, yet the government is investing a disproportionate amount in Catholic schools compared with capital investments within government schools. In fact, until 2017, Catholic schools were getting no capital funding at all. Thanks to a 2018 election promise, the Liberal government delivered capital funding to Catholic Education SA for the first time. As the Premier mentioned, that was $5.5 million, which has grown to $11.7 million in 2021. Catholic Education prioritises its capital funding allocation to high-need schools in areas of lower socio-economic advantage. However, it's Catholic school families that are required to meet the cost of capital investments. In 2021, $209 million, I think Dennis mentioned that, in capital expenditure was approved in Catholic schools. This amount was funded from borrowings and accrued school fees over a number of years. At the same time, investments in state government schools equate to approximately $1.5 billion. Now, the question is, if you are re-elected, will you commit to provide a more equitable capital funding contribution to Catholic students as the Minister for all students? Catholic Education would suggest funding contributions as follows. They've done a little bit of work for you. In 2022, this year, of course, $14 million. 2023, $16 million. 2024, $18 million. And 2025, $20 million. Minister.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I look forward to visiting your school when I'm in Whyalla, hopefully in the coming weeks, and we can talk about some of the opportunities for your children in particular. I'm really proud to be part of the first state government that has delivered any infrastructure funding indeed to our Catholic schools. I remember speaking to about 100 directors in Catholic education in August 2017, highlighting the fact that if I took all of the money out of my wallet, which I did, and I turned out I didn't have very much in my wallet that day, but I offered it to Catholic education, and indeed that would have been an increase on the zero that had ever been provided before. The fact is, as I outlined, we have had significant increases in funding, not just in terms of those specific capital grants, but nearly a 50% increase in terms of the overall funding to Catholic education as well, which sits alongside the school fees that parents pay, and of course the significant funding that comes from the Commonwealth Government. And in signing that National School Funding Reform Agreement, we guaranteed those funding increases from the Commonwealth. I'm not going to apologise for a moment, and I don't think anyone would want me to, for the support given to bringing up some of the standards in our public schools to a standard that is appropriate. And indeed, we also identified in 2018-19 that we needed to find an extra capacity for another 20,000 students across our high schools in South Australia. Half of that because of the move of Year 7 into high school, and about half of that just because of the increasing numbers of the population. Our public schools have a responsibility on the government to meet the needs of anyone who might come to them, and so consequently we need that to be in an environment that of course is also suitable for supporting the learning. So we recognise that Catholic education, Catholic families make a significant contribution towards those facilities, and indeed that state government can be a partner in that. The figures that have been suggested would represent, I think, a fourfold increase on what was put in place in 2018, and will give consideration to any good suggestion from Dennis and Neil. I neglected to say in my speech, I think Dennis and Neil, excellent advocates for Catholic education. They give me good advice on a weekly basis, and indeed their advice for Catholic schools in terms of infrastructure grants was to significantly increase. But indeed, I think that the Premier acknowledged the significant impact the funding we've already provided has had, the way that it enables projects to be delivered more quickly, and indeed further increases I'm sure will be announced in the future.
So Dennis and Neil were pretty spot on with their funding advice for you first time round, and you took that advice and put it into place. But can you commit to following that advice again? Because Minister, simply by choosing a Catholic school and despite being taxpayers, each child in a Catholic school receives less government funding than a child in a government school.
Well, that's the case in many situations, of course, but we have this schooling resource standard, so we could have the same arguments we've had for 50 years about whether there's too much funding going to government schools or non-government schools. I think that the SRS has provided us with a pretty reasonable outcome. I should say that Dennis and Neil suggested ahead of the last election that we provide $5.5 million every year. Indeed, in the last 2 years, we've doubled that. And I think that more than that, when there was an opportunity for Catholic education and other non-government sectors or public schools to put forward their pitches to be part of the Western Technical College idea, Catholic education were able to win that pitch, which also unlocked several $1 million worth of state government funding, which was able to be supported in Catholic schools. So I'd always rather, as I think a former Premier once said, under-promise and over-deliver, and indeed over-delivery, I think, in this sector is our record, not just our promise.
We look forward to that over-delivery. Thank you, Minister. Our next question is from Steve Byrne, Principal at Sacred Heart College, and this is A hot topic, as we all know, COVID and boarding schools. Steve says, Minister, the government's 2022 return to school plans for boarding schools has failed our boarding families, with students' education predictably interrupted in the first week and regional families' confidence in school boarding houses negatively impacted. Due to the strict definition of close contacts, families in Catholic boarding schools in week 1 of term were requested to return to collect their children. Of course, many of us have heard these stories, some having just arrived home from dropping them off. In one example, a family had to travel 24 hours. This was a predictable outcome of an ill-conceived approach to COVID management in boarding schools, an approach that could have been avoided if those running our boarding schools were consulted in the plan or workable experiences from interstate were copied. For example, the model developed in Queensland and adopted in New South Wales and Victoria. How does the government intend fixing this urgent problem?
Look, I've got an enormous amount of empathy for anyone, obviously, in a boarding house, especially a family that's been through the sets of circumstances described, and I understand the really high level of importance that this would hold, particularly for a school like Sacred Heart. For the entirety of this year, the Omicron strain has presented us with new challenges, and I think that in meeting the disruption that we absolutely expected, it's a reasonable thing to say that our boarding houses have met a disproportionate sense of that disruption. But our boarding houses aren't the same as classrooms, of course. I think the request that they be treated in the same way as classroom contacts was considered by Professor Spurrier, on whose advice our educational settings have been based since the beginning of the pandemic, and indeed by SA Health and her team. And she was very strongly convinced that while there were many things that could be done and advice was given to schools with boarding houses about some of what she would consider best practice to be, they weren't necessarily rules. The challenge has always come down to, throughout all the discussions that I've had with people, this definition of a close contact. At what level is somebody a close contact? At what level is somebody not seen to be like household close contact? And look, it's fair to say that apart from Western Australia, South Australia does have a more strict definition than the eastern states. I think it's also fair to say that South Australia has significantly lower levels of community transmission and numbers in COVID, and that peak of the Omicron wave has peaked in South Australia, and we are seeing some really strong signs of coming through this challenging time. That said, I recognise that there was a submission put forward that the Queensland model should be considered, and we asked Professor Spurrier. I had some time with her last week and spoke to her about it in detail, and SA Health considered it and determined that it wasn't appropriate, that it wasn't what they would consider a safe and appropriate way to go forward. I know that the New South Wales model that's been adopted this week isn't the same as the Queensland model. It's somewhere in between, and in the last couple of days we've also invited and requested of Professor Spurrier and her team that they have a look at that New South Wales model. I think it takes the principles of the South Australian model, which is all about making sure that people are kept in cohorts where possible. But I think the insight that Sacred Heart would offer and others have offered is that that cohorting expectation might be best practice, but it's actually not always possible in an individual boarding house. And I think we've got 14 schools or so with boarding houses in South Australia. Each one of them has different circumstances. The New South Wales model may offer us some extra opportunities to deal with that, and Professor Spurrier and her team are looking at it at the moment.
I'm conscious of time, so I will move on to the next question. Minister, while we're on COVID, while testing remains a requirement in schools, will you ensure the continual supply and continue to meet the cost of RAT test kits for all schools, as well as, of course, the supply of masks and air purifiers?
Well, I think there's a few things going on in that question. Obviously, the provision of RAT tests, it's not been so much a question of cost as I understand it. The discussions that have happened between the Association of Independent Schools, Catholic Education and the public sector have to this point mostly actually been about supply chain and procurement and making sure they're available, understanding that the cost of schooling is met under that SRS. We're certainly not looking at quibbling over the first suppliers while everyone's trying to get their heads around it. But ensuring that there is a supply of RATs is critical for those schools, and that's a responsibility that we've taken on. Today, I understand that Catholic Education, it's either today or tomorrow, has indeed received the second round for metropolitan Catholic schools, and couriers are off to the country this week with that second round. So the first supply was based on a notional allocation of 3 weeks' worth. We're in week 2, and we've already got the second supply now on their way. Obviously, the challenges in different schools have been different. So I want to say, if there is a school that has a specific set of challenges, it may be that there have been a need to provide some of those 7-day rat to return tests to teachers, and they are actually on the cusp of running out of those rats. Let Neil know at Catholic Ed, and indeed I've had an assurance again from the supply people within Education Department today that we'll meet those needs if there are extra needs, and that would also apply for those boarding schools as well if they're struggling to procure them. That supply chain challenge, I think, will be eased in the coming period as those rats are more freely available, but certainly that is our commitment at the moment, to ensure that all schools have an allocation, a suitable allocation, and if there's a greater level of need because of the local circumstances, then we'll address that on an urgent basis.
All right, thank you, Minister. Our next question comes from Pauline Kinsman, Principal, Immaculate Heart of Mary School. It's on increased preschool funding places. Now, Catholic Education has 30 services for children from birth to 5 years, with 9 of these services being preschools. I'm a principal of a thriving Catholic primary school. There is a strong demand from my parents to have a preschool as part of our school community. Unfortunately, there is no further government funding for preschool students in the Catholic education system. Would you commit to providing increased funding in order to expand Catholic education's number of funded places from 420 to 1,000, noting that our focus will be on areas of socio-economic need and in areas of new school developments?
Yeah, look, this is a question that actually gets quite technical, and I'm not going to go into that level of technical detail, but there's a National Preschool Reform Agreement. We've been debating it for the last 8 months or so, and that's to replace the previous agreement, which had 7 years, I think 6 or 7 years of 1 year at a time increments. So the federal government has now committed to that universal access for 15 years of preschool being available. And there's a series of challenges that we have to meet in identifying exactly where funding is going, funding following with the child and so forth. What the number that was identified, that 420 to 1,000, is slightly separate. There's some funding agreements that go back a long period of time that are outside of the normal early childhood funding arrangements. And the National School Funding Agreement, the National Preschool Funding Agreement, I should say, would put some significant barriers in addressing our desire to support Catholic Ed through a simple number. It would make it very complex. What instead I'd like to discuss with Catholic education in the coming months and years indeed, and this is something Neil and Dennis and I have discussed to a little extent so far, is identifying where there are opportunities for growth in our state, whether that's in the north or the south of our city, in regional areas that are growing, accessing the opportunity to use more federal funds, as indeed most early childhood funding, including a significant portion of preschool funding is, access more federal funds to make sure that there are no barriers to that being accessed. The preschool funding arrangements are deeply complex, and I don't think the minute or so I've got left to talk about them are going to be enough to deal with it. But rather than providing a simple solution, talking about that 420 to 1,000, what I can commit to Catholic education, to Catholic families, is that we will have a partnership framework. We'll look at, when we're looking at where to invest state government money in building state preschools, we don't want to do so in competition with a Catholic ELC if that infrastructure is going to be built. If we've got a new growth area, we want to look with our partners at what are going to be the needs of the children there before we invest state funds in state centres. So if there's an opportunity for Catholic centres to help to support the children and young people in those communities and access, of course, the federal funding that is there and indeed some state funding that is there as well, then we'll do so.
Given the demand is there right now, can you commit to having these discussions sooner rather than later?
Oh, absolutely. And indeed, this is a discussion that's already started with Dennis and Neil at our last meeting. I'm confident it'll be one of the things that we discuss very regularly. Having a framework is a key thing that we want a return martial Liberal government will do, a reliable framework when we have these planning discussions, that it's something to ensure that we don't all three sectors duplicate that effort, to make sure that it's something that we work hand in glove with the non-government sector to meet the needs of our communities.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We have another question. Nigel McPhee, Assistant Director of Finance and Infrastructure, asks about the transition of students into Year 7. Since your election in 2018, Catholic Ed has worked towards fulfilling one of your election commitments, as we've heard about that earlier this evening. Catholic school families have watched the state government invest around $1.5 billion in state schools while receiving just $35 million from the state government. And worse, the state government continued to pay its portion of the student resource standard at primary rate for those Catholic students that moved Year 7s into a secondary setting. So there's been an underfunding of the SRS for each Catholic Year 7 student to the tune of $6 million. Now, acknowledging that the shortfall in funding is met through the fees paid by Catholic school families, is the government prepared to provide some contribution to the heavy financial burden met by our families? That is ostensibly the minister's obligation to all students. Catholic Education would seek a one-off payment of $10 million to offset the more than $100 million incurred to transition Year 7 students.
Well, look, we continued the arrangements that were in place under the former government of any Year 7 student in South Australia attracting the same rate. I think that it would have been a complex and challenging ask for us to have our Year 7 students in public schools funded at a lower SRS than our Year 7s in non-government schools. Noting, of course, that many of the students in public schools were still also in a secondary setting. Our pilot schools for the Year 7 move, many of our area schools and R-12 schools. And I also note, of course, that this was a decision that Catholic Education made well before the last state election. It was a wise decision. It was a decision I commend Catholic Education for. And it's been a decision that Catholic students and Catholic education have significantly benefited from. I noted in Dennis's speech earlier, the introduction of Year 7 in high school was reflected in a period where Catholic education ceased having diminishing numbers in schools and began an increase. And over the last 4 years, we've seen an increase in Catholic enrolments from about 44,000, I think, might have been 45, up to 48,000 where it is now. It's not the only thing, it's not the only factor that has led to that increase, but indeed Catholic education has benefited significantly from that increase in numbers of students. It's not only seen increased parent fees, it's seen significant increases in funding. It's seen increases from state government from $95 million a year to $143 million a year. It's seen even more dramatic increases, I think, in federal government funding, both through the recurrent and through those capital grants, and of course through other mechanisms like JobKeeper and other funding arrangements which Catholic education has been the beneficiary. And that is to its credit, and that is good news. It's good news for Catholic families. We have absolutely fulfilled our commitments to Catholic education that we made at the last election, and I'm very, very excited that in the years to come, we'll continue those infrastructure grants. A $10 million retrospective payment is unlikely to be one of those, but we do have further announcements that we'll be making in the coming weeks and months.
So effectively, that wise decision that you spoke of did pave the way, and in doing so, the Catholic education spent more than $100 million on staff training and infrastructure to get that happening. You don't acknowledge that a one-off payment would smooth things over there?
I am very confident that Dennis and Neil would very much enjoy having that $10 million further commitment, but I'm very focused when we are governing for the South Australian community. The expectation is that we'll make commitments and that we'll meet them and that we'll focus on the future. I think that the commitments that we've already made and the benefits that Catholic education has indeed already received from that decision have left Catholic education in a very strong place, a place that has seen those numbers grow, a place that has seen Catholic education get not just more state government funding than ever before, but significantly more state government funding than ever before. When we came to government, the last budget had seen less than $100 million supported from the state government to Catholic education. Combined between the schooling resource standard, the ongoing funding, and indeed the capital grants, last year it was more than $150 million. I don't think that there's anybody who could possibly say that an increase of 50% in the amount of financial support from state government to Catholic education hasn't been a dramatic turnaround. And I'm really proud of what it's achieved in supporting every single one of those children whose parents are, as was said, all taxpayers, of course. But the children are what drives our focus, our principles and our investment.
Minister, we thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we've seen and heard this evening, there are exciting times ahead for Catholic education in South Australia. Dr. Neil McGorran would now like to introduce you to the 3 newest Catholic schools in South Australia.
I'm Neil McGorran, the Director of Catholic Education in South Australia. And it's exciting times ahead for Catholic education. And I'm proud now to share some stories from our 3 newest schools.
I'm Nathan Hayes and I'm proud to be leading the new St Francis of Assisi College, the first ever Catholic secondary school in the Riverland. We're excited to have opened our doors and so proud to have extended the Catholic education pathway from reception to Year 12 in the Riverland. We're nearly ready to start here at St Francis of Assisi College. We've already started talking with our families about partnering with them to make sure their child starts well. And we're meeting with schools and teachers to smooth the transition. We're ready with our team now in place. Really good people whose strength will help guide our new community, as well as lead our new students in learning and developing the values our college is based on.
Hello, my name is Janet Coomber and I'm the head of campus out at Two Wells for the Xavier College. We have been really excited and privileged to be one of Adelaide's newest schools, especially up here in the north. It's been our baby. We have lived and breathed this project since day one. We started off last year, opening up in 2021. We opened up with around about 160 students, and this year we're going to open up with close to 400 students. We've seen a lot of demand for that pathway from reception to Year 12, which of course we're going to offer here on this site. Underpinning our whole pathway is our Catholic ethos and our core values, which are about respect, understanding, affection and humour, so our parents know that their child will be looked after from the minute they step into the door when they're 5 years old to when they leave with Year 12 underneath their belt.
Hello, I'm Kelly Bunyan. It's my privilege to be the principal of Compass Catholic Community. We're one of Adelaide's newest schools. We're a school for 17 to 24-year-olds who haven't thrived in mainstream schooling, and it's our privilege to be part of the Northern Adelaide community here in Davern Park. We've built a team of amazing professionals with years of experience. We love working with our young people in new, innovative and life-giving ways. We're looking forward to working with our young people as we co-construct their curriculum together. We can't wait to see them re-engage with their education as their learning journey takes shape.
This is an exciting time for Catholic education and reflects our mission, animated by our Catholic faith and in partnership with families, to create opportunities for children and young people in our schools to encounter life to the full. More than ever before, we're providing opportunities to grow and to be thriving people, capable learners and leaders for the world God desires.
Well, the state election is just 38 days away now, and our next speaker has been very busy on the campaign trail. To hear about the Labor Party's commitment to Catholic education, let's hear from the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Peter Malinauskas.
Well, thank you very much, Jess, and I'd like to thank Catholic education in South Australia for this really important opportunity for me to be able to talk about Labor's plans for the future of our state, particularly in the area of education generally. I would like to take this opportunity, though, to acknowledge that we are gathering today on the lands of the Kaurna people, where we're doing this live stream from in Adelaide and paying my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Of course, the Christian faith has an extraordinary tradition and an extraordinary history for over 2,000 years, but that pales into complete insignificance in comparison to the 60,000 odd years that the Kaurna people have occupied the place that I'm lucky enough to call home, and indeed other Aboriginal people from other parts of our great state. To Dennis and Neil, thank you very much for your hard work, not just in facilitating this evening in a slightly unusual environment and context, but more importantly, outlaying a comprehensive strategic vision for this incredibly important sector, not just to our state, but more importantly to a future generation of South Australians. I'd like to acknowledge the work that Catholic education has done more broadly in succeeding in honouring its commitment to basic Christian principles, but just as importantly, educating South Australians. To see the growth in Catholic enrolment certainly warms the cockles of my heart, given my background. I myself have been fortunate enough to be a product of a Catholic education. I went to Mercedes College from reception through to the Year 12, and I guess I saw firsthand the very substantial sacrifices that my parents made in order to facilitate that great privilege upon me and my brother and sister. It started out as a more affordable enterprise and progressively became more expensive over the life of our school journey. But it was certainly, I think, an investment that my mum and dad are very grateful that they made. Principally not just because of what the school has done for me and my family academically, but more importantly, the role that Catholic education played in informing my views, my worldview, certainly my values, but most importantly, my motivations that has led me to be in this incredibly privileged role of being the leader of the party I believe in and love, and also the alternate Premier, and I hope the Premier after March this year. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the 7 mercy keys that we routinely recited every day at Mercedes did instill in me a very profound sense of social justice and a social justice mission that I desperately want to enact in any opportunity that I get in my role as a parliamentarian and hopefully as a member of a government in the future and hopefully its leader. And I see an opportunity through the power of politics and the power of government to lend an effort to ensure that everything that informs our collective desire as Christians and Catholics to look after others more than we look after ourselves be put into practice. And that is why education is such a fundamental central pillar of my policy that I'm taking to the election. In October last year, I announced a comprehensive education policy that I and my team have been working on exhaustively for the better part of 3 years. Unfortunately, the nature of opposition during the course of a pandemic is that you tend to get relegated out of the news cycles to the extent that we would like, and our key policy announcements may not have got the attention that we believe is warranted, but that nonetheless provides an opportunity today for us to go through some of those policies, which I'll do in just a moment. But what underpins them, of course, is a desire to use the most powerful lever that state government has to lift up a future generation of South Australians. Something that concerns me quite deeply, of course, is what I describe as the dark underbelly of the COVID pandemic. It is true that South Australians have risen to the occasion to confront the challenges of COVID-19, but it is also true that South Australia has fallen victim to the dark underbelly of COVID, which of course is the exacerbation of economic inequity that exists within our state and within our country. The Premier quite rightly refers to our relatively low unemployment rate by historic standards, but it's also true that we have the second worst participation rate in the country. Last year we had the second worst unemployment rate on average in the country, but most alarmingly we have one of the worst underemployment rates in the nation. All the while, South Australians unfortunately are currently experiencing real wage decline. That is to say, for a wage and salary earner in our state at the moment, the rate of inflation is well and truly outpacing the rate of wages growth. And as we contemplate the future, we should be alive to the fact that currently our nation and our state is experiencing the greatest fiscal expansion in our history. That is to say, we are incurring more debt than at any other time in the history of the state and the Commonwealth, while also having the loosest monetary policy in our history. The point being is the current economic settings that are fueling demand for labour and growth, while good in achieving those strategic objectives, doesn't or is not sustainable into the long term. And layer on top of that the fact that young South Australians who don't own a home, their ability to get into the housing market is becoming harder, let alone a renter. And layer on top of that, people who do not have access to equities or don't own equities are being locked out of that market. We have a long-term structural challenge on our hands, one that I believe this election and the policies that are presented to this state must confront. If we are sincere as Christians about believing in a society that provides social justice and equality of opportunity, then of course we must ensure that we have an education policy that gives every last child, regardless of their faith, regardless of their postcode, regardless of their parents' wealth, the opportunity to excel and participate in the future labour market and be able to enjoy not just the work that dignity that work provides, but also a better standard of living, which means we must maximise the power of the muscle between our children's ears and the skills in their hands. And that is what our policy seeks to achieve. Combined with the often, in my view, not often spoken enough truth that our country is currently experiencing a decline on average for school-age performance, we have a big challenge on our hands. Australia's performance on the Program for International Student Assessment has been going backwards relative to virtually every other, or to a lot of other countries in the world. By OECD standards, we're in rapid decline. But more tragically, and most tragically in my view, Australia's average educational performance in accordance by PISA scores isn't going backwards just to relative to everybody else, but more importantly, going backwards to ourselves. On average, a child going to school today will achieve a worse educational outcome than what would have been the case if they went to school 15 years ago. Now that, the fault for that, I do not lay at the feet of any particular political party, any particular ideology, any particular state or federal government. This is something that all policymakers must accept a degree of responsibility for. But it is not a challenge or not a statistic that is getting nearly enough attention that it deserves. I want to let you in on a little secret, although it's not that big a secret, but in the lead up to elections, political parties do polling. They regularly, frequently, in fact tonight as we speak, I'm receiving text messages that someone's out there doing polling on phones tonight. And in that polling, political parties of all persuasions regularly ask, what are the most important issues to South Australians? And I want to reveal a secret live here tonight on this live stream, that the issue that seems to be top of mind for most South Australians at the moment is health and COVID, ramping and the like. Then there's a gap right down towards the economy and then the environment, but then education comes somewhat after that, despite the fact that our performance is languishing. And that, for me, raises great alarm, because top of every single South Australian's mind should be the performance of our education standards, because that is what will underpin the ability for us to have an equitable society into the future and a generation of South Australians being able to enjoy a decent standard of living. So what will we do about it if we're lucky enough to form a government? Well, I have developed a comprehensive education policy with my team that seeks to address some long-term structural problems. First of all, our lack of universal preschool for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in our state. I acknowledge the role that the Catholic sector has played in the provision of these services in the past and currently, but we must expand upon that. And I have announced that a Malinowskis Labor government will establish a Royal Commission that will see to the engagement with all sectors within the education community to ensure that we deliver a policy of the provision of universal access to 3-year-old preschool by 2026. This is essential. Other states are doing it, other countries are doing it. The OECD average for investment in early childhood education is 0.61% of GDP. In Australia, it is only 0.2%. All of the research tells us that investment in early childhood education delivers the best bang for buck when it comes to having a positive impact on people's lives, and we have a plan to do that. Similarly, I have taken on a challenge of delivering a somewhat controversial policy of a teaching quality plan, a 7-point plan that has elements in it that are not supported by the Australian Education Union, but nonetheless speak to a determination to improving teacher quality in our state where the state government can. On top of that, we are going to invest in technical colleges, 5 of them across the state. We are essentially trying to mirror what the Catholic sector already has led the state in. I am utterly inspired by the work that happens at St Patrick's Technical College. I want to ensure that that model of learning is available to more South Australians in metropolitan Adelaide, but also importantly within our regions. We also have a plan to invest heavily and work closely with the higher education sector by pursuing university amalgamation here in South Australia. We'll be announcing a comprehensive TAFE policy in the lead up to the election. We'll be employing 100 allied health professionals to be deployed to those students most in need, whether it be needing access to a child psychologist or needing access to a speech pathologist. These are the sorts of investments that we are capable of making as a modern state in a modern country, in a wealthy economy. We can make these investments to ensure that every last child has that ability to succeed. I am absolutely fervent in my determination to ensure that education is a central pillar of not just a social policy, but more importantly, an economic policy. COVID has laid bare that we have a great shortage of skills in our state and demonstrates even more the necessity for us to use education policy to uplift a people. Can I conclude by saying that my parliamentary colleague, the Shadow Education Minister Blair Boyer, will go through Labor's plans to deal with the Catholic education sector more specifically, including some, I know, top-of-mind issues that Dennis and Neil have very keenly and passionately advocated to us for some period of time, and I look forward to Blair being able to make our announcements in that regard. But can I just finish by saying this? The Catholic education sector in this state has served our people exceptionally well. I honour and thank you for maintaining the values that underpin the education that you provide. It's important to me, it's important to my family, but more importantly, it's important to so many South Australians. I sincerely hope that that work can continue into the future. It makes our state a better place, a fairer place, and I want to thank each and every one of you that have taken the time to listen to our collective words this evening, whether it be from the Premier or the Minister or myself or Blair, and thank you for all your hard work throughout the course of the pandemic. But most importantly, I hope that the legacy of the pandemic will be a fairer state for all for many generations to come.
Thank you so much, Peter. We very much appreciate your words tonight, your support as well, and the fact that you've been here in person with us is enormously significant to us. For some more detail on the Labor Party's commitment to Catholic education going forward, the Shadow Minister for Education, Blair Boyer, welcome to the hot seat, Blair. We'll again have time for questions at the end, but for now, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jess, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And could I too begin by acknowledging that the land we meet on tonight is Kaurna land, and I pay respect to their elders, past and present. And of course, could I also acknowledge Archbishop O'Regan, the Honourable John Gardner MP, the Minister for Education, Professor Dennis Ralphs, Dr Neil McGoran and Mrs Nikki Marden. And of course, a very big hello to all those people who are watching online. I know there are lots of people out there, but in particular to our principals, to our classroom teachers and classroom staff. It's fantastic to have you online listening, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me as the Shadow Minister for Education to get a chance to address you and to hear from you as well. I'd like to begin though just by acknowledging the sentiments of our previous speakers this evening. These really have been unprecedented times over the last 2 years. And I know as the father of 3 primary age daughters that I have very genuinely and acutely felt feelings of guilt as I have taken them to the school gate or to the classroom doorstep over the last 2 years and left them in the hands of the very, very capable educators who look after them, and then walked away and left our teachers and our SSOs and other staff to care for them during a global pandemic when so many other people had the opportunity to work from home. And I want to acknowledge the sacrifices that you have made in staying there at the coalface when so many other people did have the opportunity to work from somewhere else. And of course, I also would like to acknowledge that you've had more to contend with across these last 2 years than just educating our children. You have also, of course, been the first port of call in many instances from parents, grandparents and carers who have been trying to navigate all the complexities of the COVID pandemic. And in many cases, they have come to you to ask questions about what they need to do, what they should be doing in terms of keeping their children safe. And of course, in many cases, they have also come to you to air their frustrations. So for all that you have done and stood up for over the last 2 years, South Australia, I think, owes you a very big debt of gratitude, and as the Shadow Minister for Education, but also as a Member of Parliament who represents a number of Catholic schools and Catholic school students in the northeastern suburbs, I want to say thank you from the outset. As Peter briefly mentioned in his comments just earlier, the two of us recently met with Dennis and Neil to discuss what the Catholic sector in South Australia is looking for from the next state government here. And I want to make an effort this evening as best I can to address specifically some of the items that were discussed at the meeting that Peter and I had with Dennis and Neil, and a number of which have already come up, of course, this evening as well. Before I do so, though, I just want to give a very small bit of background about myself. Before being elected to State Parliament in 2018, I worked for the former Premier Jay Weatherill for a couple of years. And in fact, I was actually there working for Jay when Labor made the announcement that we would increase the school resourcing standard for Catholic schools to 22%. Now, I know that is something that your sector campaigned for, and I was very proud to be there with Jay on the day that we announced that, and I am indeed pleased to see that this government has continued the commitment that Labor made about 5 years ago now. And of course, this is my opportunity to confirm with all of you this evening that if Labor is elected at the March 19 election this year, and if Peter Malinauskas becomes the Premier, we will commit to that 22% SRS funding for your sector into the future. We've also heard tonight comments about capital grants for Catholic schools, and we had some questions to the Minister about capital grants for Catholic schools. And just to set the record straight, in fact, the $5.5 million that was granted, or has been granted, to Catholic schools for infrastructure projects was actually committed to in 2017 by the then Labor government. And of course, we have no hesitation this evening in committing to that on an ongoing basis if we are fortunate enough to be elected on March 19. Another issue that has come up as well this evening and in the meeting that Peter and I had with Dennis and Neil is this long-standing issue around Catholic preschools and a cap that has been placed upon them of 420 students. Now, it is true that there is a bit of history to the issue. I think it might have been back in the 1970s, in fact, when the then government was trying to respond to a real growth in demand for preschool and decided that it couldn't meet that demand itself. So approached the Catholic sector to see if it could start some preschools to help meet that demand. And although I think we now have 9 sites due to one opening up in Port Pirie instead of 8, the number of enrolments that could be accepted at those 8, now 9 sites has been capped at 420. And we've heard this evening that your sector would very much like to see that increased to 1,000. Now, although I'm not here this evening to say that we will definitely do that, the commitment that Peter Malinauskas and I gave to Dennis and Neil in our meeting was that as part of the Royal Commission that Peter announced that Labor will hold into seeing how we can deliver universal preschool for both 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds, we have given a commitment to add to the terms of reference, looking at whether or not those Catholic preschools can in fact play a role in delivering universal 3-year-old preschool. Because although I think we can all agree that that is the direction in which we need to be heading in the future, there are some complexities around making it happen, particularly in terms of capacity. And it might be that increasing or expanding the enrolment cap at those 9 Catholic preschools might actually form a very important and successful solution to making sure that we can not just say that we're heading towards universal 3-year-old preschool, but actually delivering it as well. And buses, of course, the perennial issue it has seen for so long now, and I know it has been an enormous source of frustration for your sector. And I grew up on a farm. I caught the bus to school. And I must say, the notion to me of a bus that has spare seats, driving past students who don't go to public schools but go to Catholic or independent schools, and deciding that they can't pick them up really goes against every fibre of my being. I know currently the government has provided $1 million per year to the Catholic sector to go towards purchasing some additional bus stock, but also making sure that the existing bus stock is in a state and has the ability to accommodate those Catholic students who need to get from their home to school. I'm happy to say that we will match the government's funding of $1.5 million, so an increase of $1 million to $1.5 million by way of trying to make sure that once and for all we can actually put this issue to bed and that in the future we are not back here talking about an issue which really does seem so fundamental, like public transport in regional areas for school students regardless of what school they actually attend. There is one other element to that, though, that I'd like to just address briefly. Dennis and Neil told Peter and I that they believe there have been situations over the last few years where the Education Department has deliberately downsized buses under the guise of saving money, but they believe in an effort to actually, in a ham-fisted way, deal with the issue of whether or not they can accommodate non-government students on those buses. And I will say this to you right now. If we are elected on March the 19th, we will ask for an investigation into whether or not those practices have been occurring, and if they had, we'll put a stop to them straight away. One of the things I think that we can be especially proud of in South Australia is that our education system is more sector blind than it is in other states and territories. And by sector blind, I mean that we do a better job here in South Australia of delivering needs-based funding, which of course we all remember was the whole idea behind the historic Gonski Agreement, than delivering sector-based funding for students. Now, I don't pretend it's perfect. I know there is always room for improvement, but if I get the opportunity to be the Minister for Education this March, this is very much something that I would like to build on in my tenure as Minister, because I got to see when I was working for the former Premier, up close and personal during those negotiations around Gonski, how powerful it was here in South Australia when we went to that negotiation table with the federal government in a unified manner, where Catholic, public and independent sectors were all largely in agreement and standing next to each other as we fought for the absolute best deal we could get for all our students. And unfortunately, of course, we are very soon going to be back into another round of funding negotiations this year and next. And I must say to you all that it is more important than ever that we are unified again in how we approach those negotiations. I'm sure you all realise there is a lot on the line here, and I want to be clear with all of you here this evening that if Peter is Premier and if I'm the Education Minister and we have a seat at that negotiation table, we will not accept a deal that is poorer for South Australian students, regardless of who is offering it, whether that be a federal Labor government or a federal Liberal government. I'd like to finish, though, by making it very clear to you the commitment that Labor makes in terms of the principles that will guide us in terms of how we interact, negotiate and work with the Catholic sector. First and foremost, it's about the kids, it's not about the sector. Second, some students need more funding than others, for all the reasons that you are so familiar with, because you are the ones out there in classrooms every day trying to help those students overcome those challenges. And thirdly, the Minister for Education is the Minister for Education for all school children in South Australia, regardless of whether they go to a Catholic school, an independent school or a public school. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. And again, thank you for all that you have done, particularly across these 2 very, very difficult years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blair. And I have been madly shuffling my questions and papers while you've been speaking, because you have answered many of the questions that our people have sent in. So let's start from the start. I wanted to obviously thank you for your commitments on the SRS and the buses. That is welcomed very much by Catholic Education, and that wipes out pretty much 2 questions from the top. So yeah, that's great. We had a question earlier from Damien Judd, Principal at Samaritan College, Whyalla, on proportional capital funding for non-government schools. I'll just recap on that in case you weren't across it, but as we know, 1 in 5 students attends a Catholic school in SA, yet the government is investing a disproportionate amount in Catholic schools compared with capital investments with government schools. The large shortfall in the capital funding required can only be met by Catholic school parents through their school fees. We talked earlier in the night about how $209 million was spent in 2021 in capital expenditure by Catholic schools. And at the same time, investment in state government schools equate to approximately $1.5 billion. If you're elected, will you commit to provide a more equitable capital funding contribution to Catholic students as the Minister of all students, as you have reinforced that you will be? And we heard those figures, 14 million this year, 16 million next year, then 18 million 2024 and 20 million in 2025.
Well, thank you, Jess. And could I say from the outset that I very much understand the importance of infrastructure at schools. I understood it as a student who went to a regional school, one that hadn't been invested in for many, many years and was quite run down. And not only is it a challenge, of course, for the school itself to attract students when it is competing with other schools that might have had investment, but of course it has a effect upon students in terms of how they learn and the pride they feel in their school. So I completely acknowledge that the need for new, modern, functional infrastructure is every bit as important for the Catholic sector as it is for any other sector. And I want to add, as I said in my words just before, that in 2017 it was the former Labor government that made the commitment to give the $5.5 million recurring every year. And we will stand by at least maintaining that figure. I'm not here this evening to make an announcement about whether or not that will be increased or not.
You can be.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. That's very good of you. But I would point people to the track record that Labor has had in terms of increasing funding for the Catholic sector here in South Australia. And I guess somewhat cheekily remind them of my small role, but nonetheless a role that I played behind the scenes in making sure that we made that commitment back in 2017. And if I get the opportunity to be the person at the standing by Peter's side as his education minister, I fully intend to continue that support for the Catholic education sector, and I'll be available to all principals and Catholic school communities to go out, inspect their school sites and listen to them about what they need and why they need it.
All right, thank you for that commitment. Our next question is on vocational education and technical colleges, and it comes from Paul Ryken at Cardine College. Catholic Education applauds the Labor Party announcement to expand the number of placements available through the establishment of 5 new technical colleges. Catholic Education has recently expanded its trade offering in partnership with the government at Mount Carmel College in Rosewater through the Western Technical College. Catholic Education has many other existing trade centres across its school network and has specialist trade education offerings at St Patrick's Technical College and Cardine College's Marcellin campus. Is it the Labor Party's intention to strategically align any taxpayer-funded investments more efficiently through joint partnership initiatives with Catholic Education, enabling an expansion of existing facilities to deliver on this policy?
That is a very good question.
It is.
And I must say, though, one that I did anticipate, and it's a very fair question as well, and we heard Peter speak just before about the announcement that we made last year about building 5 new technical colleges across South Australia, and we have announced the locations of 2 of those, Jess. I think we have said Port Augusta and Mount Gambier, and we will announce the locations of the other 3 before the election as well. I've had the privilege of going to St Pat's a couple of times. A lot of the young people from the state seat of right that I represent leave at year 10 and go to St Pat's, and I know Danny very well, and it is an excellent model. And in fact, after I saw Professor Rouse for the first time after we made that announcement, in his cheeky manner, he said to me, although he was very happy to see that we were moving in a direction like that, we could have perhaps acknowledged the fact that we were looking to the Catholic sector and Cardine and Marcellin and St Pat's and the success that they have had with those 2 fantastic campuses in what we have announced. And I can happily say tonight, absolutely. That is absolutely a huge part of the inspiration for us doing this. And I have been asked by Danny out at St Pat's and Neil and Dennis about whether or not we were setting these up in some kind of competition to the existing Catholic ones. And I can say tonight, absolutely not. our idea is to complement the existing ones like Marcelin and St Pat's, to put the metropolitan technical colleges that a Malinascus Labor government will build into positions where there is both choice in terms of people going to a technical school with in the Catholic sector or one in the public sector, but also in terms of geographically spacing them out in areas to make sure that there was one close to as many young South Australian people as possible. And I'm very happy to work with the existing Catholic sector in doing whatever we can to make the model that they currently do, which is already, yes, successful, but I think demand is starting to outstrip supply. So in the spirit of making sure that we complement each other with what a Malinascus Labor government will build and with what the Catholic sector has already built, I'm very happy to work with the existing Catholic campuses to see if we can't do things more efficiently to support them as well.
So do we need 5 new campuses? Is it because of demand that you're building them? Why not try and use the existing infrastructure?
Well, we have said that the technical colleges that we will build, Jess, will be co-located on secondary school sites. So, of course, because we want to offer all that vocational education and training experience to those year 10 to 12 students, but we also want them to complete their SACE. So we want them to remain engaged in school and finish their SACE, to have that as a backup, I guess, later on if things might not pan out like like they thought they might. We want to make sure that they work with the Catholic sector in the most efficient way we possibly can. Very happy to work with the sector in any way they think we can do that better. I think certainly at the moment demand is outstripping supply. The growth out at St Pat's is incredible, and I know a couple of high schools in my patch out in the northeast are seeing incredible rates of students who are not so much leaving because they aren't happy with the secondary school that they're at, but they see what is being offered at St Pat's and Marcelin, and they know that's where they want to go, and they're leaving at year 10 in huge numbers to go and do it. I think we need to not only support the existing campuses, the Catholic ones, to be able to potentially take more enrolments, but we certainly need a public offering as well, because that demand is quite incredible.
All right, thank you for answering that one. Our next question is on the transition of students into Year 7, and it comes from Nigel McPhee, Assistant Director, Finance and Infrastructure. We asked the same question to the Education Minister. So Catholic school families have watched the state government invest around $1.5 billion in capital investments in government schools over recent years, while Catholic schools receive just $35 million from the state government. In fact, Catholic education has received no direct funding to support its students' transition into Year 7, despite investing around $150 million in capital expenditure to effect this policy requirement. Worse, the Liberal government continued to pay its portion of the student resource standard at primary rate for those Catholic students that moved Year 7 into a secondary setting. So this has been an underfunding to the tune of around $6 million. Now, acknowledging that the shortfall in funding has been and continues to be met with loan commitments through the fees paid by Catholic school families, would a Labor government acknowledge this funding inconsistency and commit to a modest one-off request by Catholic education of $10 million?
Well, could I say, Jess, first of all, that the transition to Year 7 was a policy that was taken by the then Liberal opposition in 2018. At the time, it wasn't a policy that the then Labor government had. Having said that, we completely accept Year 7 is now going to be in high school, and it was probably inevitable. But the issue I take with it is the enormous underfunding of that transition that has occurred. Yes, the government bandies around a figure of, I thought it was 1.2, it's just grown to $1.5 billion, I think, according to them, that they have spent on infrastructure. The truth is that a lot of it was projects. It was called Building Better Schools. The former Labor government had started, and we had specific school projects set up with that money. The Liberal government came into power. It clawed back a lot of that money from schools and told them you need to spend that on new classrooms for the transition of Year 7 into high school. Although I understand the person asking the question sees a big discrepancy in terms of what has flowed to the public system and what has flowed to the Catholic system, the truth is that a lot of the money that the government claims it has put into the transition of Year 7 into high school actually came out of other programs in the first place. Now, I'm happy to look at this issue if I become the Minister. I'm not going to make a commitment to this tonight. And I would echo the words of the Minister, in fact, earlier somewhat, which is not something that I often do, but I will tonight, when he said that, in actual fact, the $10 million, although I have no doubt it's a sum of money that Dennis and Neil would in fact be very happy to have, is really a drop in the ocean in compared to the extra money that has flowed, and deservedly so, to the Catholic sector under increasing that school resourcing standard up to 22% and going from only low interest or no interest loans to a actual capital grants recurring program of 5.5. So I acknowledge that the Catholic sector went out there and did it very efficiently, their transition, more efficiently certainly than the government has done with the public system. But I think the big increases here are really under that SRS funding and the recurring grants, which we are both pleased tonight to commit to continuing if we are lucky enough to be elected in March this year.
All right, on to another question which comes from Kelly Bunyan, Principal at Compass Catholic Community. It's around supporting young people with learning challenges and mental health issues. Now, the Labor Party's announced a policy position supporting young people with learning challenges and mental health issues. Catholic Education has recently commenced 2 new special assistance schools in Northern Adelaide, in Davern Park, and has another school operating in the southern suburbs. With pre-existing Catholic Education specialist support facilities already built and now operating, how will Catholic Education fit into this Labor Party policy?
Great question. And if I'm honest, Jess, I reckon the biggest challenge out there in the education sector broadly, not just in South Australia but in Australia, I think is the level of unmet need in terms of kids with disability not getting the support that they need, and that's across all sectors. But I think there is a tsunami of mental health issues that were probably pre-existing really before COVID hit and have only been exacerbated by COVID. And yes, Peter and I made a commitment towards a big increase in the amount of money to have more of those allied health support professionals being able to go out and provide that support. I suspect even with that large injection of funds that it's barely going to touch the size in terms of the unmet need that is there. And of course I understand the Catholic system is grappling with the exact same problems in this school. And the most frightening thing that I hear as a father of young kids, but just as a member of Parliament, are stories of children as young as 7, 8, 9 who are experiencing suicidal ideation. And I think Peter and I discussed that at length before we made our announcement and came to the conclusion, well, it's completely unacceptable. It's horrifying to think that in this day and age we have kids that age who are contemplating taking their own life, and we need to do something about it. I acknowledge that the announcement Labor's made so far is in the context of the public system. I would very much like to work with the Catholic system in terms of what we can do there too, and I guess refer people back to my comments about the 3 guiding principles that we will take if we are elected to government in terms of education, and number 1 of those was it's about the kid, it's not about the sector, and we will do what we can to make sure that the Catholic system can respond at least as well as the public system can respond as well.
How do you think Catholic Education could fit into that policy? How can they support you and be part of the solution?
Well, the first thing, of course, that we're going to do, the first thing that, if we are elected to government, the first thing that any new government does is sit down and have a look at how it can start delivering on its election commitments, and this is one of our biggest. So if I'm lucky enough to be, still around and elected and the Education Minister, then I'm going to get straight to it in terms of setting out a roadmap for how all the things that we have committed to doing we can do, and I'm very happy to have the Catholic sector as part of looking at how we might deliver it and working with them on how they might be able to deliver it too. Happy to have them always inside the tent, and I understand that when it comes to things like the mental health of kids, there's absolutely no room for putting walls up between sectors that shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Blair, our last question comes from Trish Jarvis, Executive Officer, Catholic School Parents SA. And Trish says, if you are elected to government, will you be the Education Minister for every student in every school by appropriately resourcing each student regardless of which school and which sector they attend? Trish says, we pay taxes too. Can you give examples of how you would ensure this?
Yes, and a very fair question, and it's how I finished my prepared address to you all this evening, was by saying that my commitment to you is that the Minister for Education in South Australia is the Minister for Education for every student, regardless of whether they go to a public school, a Catholic school or an independent school. And I certainly intend to make good on that commitment. I have actually had, before being elected to Parliament, quite a lengthy working history with both Dr McGorran and Dennis. I would like to think that they would confirm that I worked in a very constructive manner and that I was a positive force behind the scenes there for seeing those big changes like the 22% SRS and the 5.5 million of recurring grants. So I guess if Trish, who was asking your question, wants to have an example of why indeed I will make good on my commitment to be the Education Minister for all, you can look to the history of the things that I have done, how I've engaged with schools in my own area, and I have to give a shout out now to Jason Mittiger from St Francis Xavier Regional Catholic College, who is online, a fantastic school in my area, but I like to think that I've engaged with them every bit as strongly, as warmly and as genuinely as I have with any public schools in my area as well.
All right, well, we thank you so much for your time this evening, Blair. Thank you for the announcements or the commitments that you've made. They are very much welcomed. Who knows what happens on March 19, but if you are elected to government, I'm sure Catholic education will be the first to open their doors.
I'm sure they will. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you so much for being with us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a very informative and inspiring night. And I think to wrap things up, I'll invite Professor Ralph back to the lectern.
Thank you, Jess. What a wonderful evening it has been. On behalf of the South Australian Commission for Catholic Schools, there are a raft of people that I'd like to thank for making tonight possible. But firstly, I want to thank all of those of you spread across this state. I've heard that groups have come together, and I've heard that in St Mark's, Port Pirie, they're having very special cakes tonight, and I'm missing out. So the next time I'm in Port Pirie, we might have another one of those nights. But it's great that people have come together not just to hear, but to celebrate the clarity of the directions that have been set by your commission. The Commission's made it very clear in terms of its 7 commitments to you and to everyone in South Australia. We've spelt out the 21 outcomes that we seek to achieve over this next period until 2027. We hope that we've raised your expectations and given you strength in facing the expanding horizons. Also, how important it is that we deepen our practices, the way we go about our work with teaching and learning. There's so much more that we can do in terms of unpacking what works best to bring the outcomes that we're seeking for every child and young person in our schools, colleges and centres. I hope you will join with us in putting into action the new strategy document towards 2027, expanding horizons and deepening practices. An occasion such as tonight cannot happen without the help of many people. Firstly, I want to go back to late last year when we intended, after the Commission approved the new strategy, to hold a function in the magnificent centre at Sacred Heart College. The Sacred Heart principal, the staff, the community, the students were enthusiastic in their response. The students prepared their performances. We organised the layout and all of the arrangements that would occur. And although we're not there tonight, I want to acknowledge the way they responded to us. And I was sorry when, because of further developments over the Christmas period with Omicron, with the effects within COVID restrictions, that we were not able to be in person with everyone tonight. However, I want to commend the agility, responsiveness and expertise of everyone who became involved in putting together tonight's event and streaming it across the City of Adelaide and across South Australia. We have recorded tonight's proceedings. It will be available to you for meetings with your parents and with others. You can choose sections of it that you want to use for particular reasons. But I hope it will be a valuable resource as you work out the ways in which you and your school, college and centre will be able to respond to those commitments and those expected outcomes. I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the Commission the people within the Catholic Education Office who showed great agility and expertise and responsiveness in moving from a performance function at Sacred Heart College to this online streamed meeting this evening. I can't name them tonight because there were many, but they know who they are, and I have endeavoured to speak to all of them as I could to say personally, thank you. I want to commend VJ Sound, the technicians who have made this possible tonight, to ensure that it was delivered in a professional manner, and they have done an outstanding job. So thank you, VJ Sound. I would like to thank our host and MC for this evening, Jessica Adamson. We were delighted when Jess accepted our invitation to be with us tonight. The depth of her experience, her high level of professionalism, and her commitment to Catholic education would have been evident to everyone here tonight. But of course, we all feel we know Jess because of the length of time she has been on television in South Australia. And we're dearly honoured, Jess, that you accepted our invitation and appreciated it very much. To the Premier, Stephen Marshall, to the Leader of the Opposition, Peter Malinauskas, to the Minister of Education, John Gardner, and for the Shadow Minister, Blair Boyer. Thank you for being here tonight. I think it says a lot about Catholic education in South Australia that those four key people gave of their time, prepared for tonight, presented here with us, and will go away with many things to think about. I want you to know that as Chairman of the Commission, along with Dr. Neil McGorran, we will be following up all those questions that were put by people from across the state. We'll be working with the government of the day, whoever it is. But in the lead up to the election on March 19th, we will begin from tonight an active campaign that will stretch right across the state, right into the depths of every home and every electorate. Everyone in South Australia will become aware of what we are seeking to achieve and what we are expecting of the state government in South Australia to provide for Catholic education in this next period. We would not be relaxed to hear vague promises, or we'll have a look at it, we confirm we'll do something about it. Over this next period, our people will be speaking to local members and candidates across the board to make sure that they are aware that on the key issues with regard to Capital funding. We are seeking 14 million in 2022, 16 million the following year, 18 million the year after, and 20 million per year from the state government in the fourth year. We'll be very clear to follow up on the commitments with regard to the school buses. We'll be watching very carefully what happens with technical colleges, because we're very proud of the work that happens at St Patrick's Technical College, at Marcelin Technical College at Cardine, and our Western Technical College. We want to make sure that those that are going to create new technical colleges do them in such a way that they are not impeding the excellent work that's already happening in the 3 Catholic technical colleges in the western suburbs, in the northern suburbs, and in the southern suburbs. Thank you to all of you for being present tonight. It's been our pleasure to present to you our new strategic directions document towards 2027, expanding horizons and deepening practices. Thank you.